You have been close, not far. Not starting from zero, not failing. Close. Close to the breakthrough you could almost name. Close enough to feel it, that particular quality of air that surrounds the edge of a thing about to change. You started making quiet plans, not loud plans. You have learned not to make loud plans, but quiet ones. The kind you carry inside without telling anyone, because telling someone means risking the humiliation of explaining later why it didn't happen. And then it didn't happen. And you found yourself doing what you always do after the almost. You explained it. You found the reason. The timing was off. The economy shifted. Someone made a decision you had no control over. Something came in and took what was building, and you absorbed it. You adjusted. You got back up, because that is what you do, and you went back to work. And somewhere in the back of your mind, in a place you do not visit often, because it is too uncomfortable to stay there, a question began to form. A question you have never said out loud to anyone. A question that feels too dangerous to ask because of what the answer might mean. Why does this keep happening to me? Not once, not twice. This pattern, this specific recurring pattern of getting close and not arriving, of building and losing, of the door opening just enough to see the light, and then closing before you can walk through it. Stay with me, because that question, the one you have been afraid to ask, is exactly what I am here to answer today. And before I go any further, if this is your first time here and what I just said landed on you the way truth lands, subscribe to this channel right now. Do not wait for the end. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because what I am going to teach today builds directly into the next video in this sequence, and you need both. Subscribe now and stay close. I have been studying and teaching the ancient Jewish wisdom on provision, what our tradition calls parnasa, for decades. And in all of that time, sitting with hundreds of people in genuine financial distress, I have observed one pattern that appears more reliably than any other, more reliably than bad decisions, more reliably than difficult circumstances, more reliably than the economy, the market, the timing, or the industry. The pattern is this: the people who live in the almost are almost never people who lack effort. They are almost never lazy. They are almost never faithless. They are almost never unintelligent or underqualified or unworthy of the provision they are seeking. They are people who are spiritually misaligned in a way they have never been shown. And the misalignment is not random. It follows a specific shape. It has a specific cause. And it has a specific name in our tradition, a name that was handed down through generations of teachers, preserved precisely because those who carried it understood what would happen if it was lost. The name is Cheshbon Hanefesh. I am going to teach you what that means today. I'm going to show you the full law, where it comes from, how it operates, why it is the missing layer underneath everything you have already tried. I'm going to give you the practice, step by step, in more detail than I have ever given it publicly. But before I give you the law, I need to show you something first. I need to show you why this law was forgotten, and I need to show you who benefits from the fact that you do not know it. Because that is not an accident. There are systems, economic, psychological, cultural, that are built on the premise of your misalignment, that require your misalignment to function. Systems that profit specifically from the gap between what you are living and what the covenant promises you. And those systems are not going to teach you the law that closes that gap. They are going to teach you everything else. They are going to teach you budgeting, discipline, savings rates, investment, vehicles, positive thinking, manifestation, hustle, mindset shifts, an endless library of techniques that address the surface of the problem while the root remains untouched, because the surface is profitable. The root, the spiritual root, is not something they can sell you a subscription for. The ancient teachers of my tradition understood this. They understood that the most powerful laws are the ones that the powerful have the most incentive to suppress, not through conspiracy, through neglect, through silence, through the gradual erosion of a practice that was never written in a best-selling book, never packaged in an online course, never turned into a keynote speech at a conference. The Cheshbon Hanefesh survived because it was passed from person to person, family to family, teacher to student, not because it was hidden, because it was protected, because the people who understood its value kept it alive through the only medium that cannot be bought or sold or scaled, relationship. And that is what is happening here today. I am not selling you something, I am passing something to you. And when I give it to you completely, when you understand not just the practice but the law underneath the practice, you are going to understand why everything else you have tried has produced results that never quite match the effort you put in. But first, the story I need you to hear. Because before the law, there must be a human being. Because law without a face is philosophy. And I am not here to philosophize. I'm here to change something in your life. His name, for today's purposes, is Nathaniel. I want you to understand what Nathaniel's Sunday evenings looked like. Because when I say he was not in crisis, I mean it in the technical sense. He had a job, a home, a family, the bills were paid. But if you had sat next to him on a Sunday evening, you would have recognized something in his face that you might recognize in your own mirror. Nathaniel would sit at his kitchen table on Sunday evenings, after the dishes were done, after the children were in bed, after his wife had gone upstairs, and he would open his laptop, not to work, not to plan. He would open his bank account, his credit card statements, his retirement account projection, and he would look at them for a long time, not because he was finding anything new. The numbers did not change dramatically from Sunday to Sunday. He looked at them because he was doing what he had done every Sunday evening for 8 years, running the accounting of his anxiety, cataloging the gap, measuring the distance between where he was and where he was supposed to be by now. He was 51 years old. He had worked since he was 16. He had never stopped. He had never taken a year off to find himself, never blown money on things he could not afford, never made the catastrophic decisions that would have explained the gap. He was, by any reasonable measure, a responsible man who had done what responsible men are supposed to do. And he was nowhere near where responsible men who do what they are supposed to do are supposed to arrive. He had tried everything. The financial planning. He had sat in an office with a man in an expensive suit who had given him a 5-year projection and a folder with tabs, and he had followed the plan. And 5 years later, the plan had not moved the needle in any direction that mattered. He had tried the motivational content, the books, the podcasts, the YouTube channels of men who had made millions telling other men how to make millions. He had tried prayer, consistent and sincere. He had tried giving, faithfully, beyond his comfort level, from genuine belief that the covenant of Parnassa rewarded the open hand. And Sunday after Sunday the numbers looked roughly the same. Now, I want to tell you about the morning everything shifted for Nathaniel. Not the morning his finances changed, that came later. The morning his understanding changed. Because that morning came first, and it came from a direction he did not expect. It was a Thursday, not a Sunday, a Thursday morning. He had woken up early, as he always did, 4:57 in the morning. He told me later he had not used an alarm in years. His body simply woke at that time, trained by decades of early rising. He made coffee. He sat at the same kitchen table, and instead of opening the laptop that morning, he did something different. He sat in silence. Not intentional silence. He had forgotten to charge his phone and was waiting for it to turn on, so he sat. And in that accidental silence, with no screen to look at, no numbers to run, no content to consume, a thought arrived that had never quite formed itself into words before. He thought, I receive everything that comes to me as if it is already leaving. He sat with that for a moment. It was uncomfortable in a way that felt important. He turned it over. He examined it. Every raise he had received over his career, and there had been several. He was good at his job. People recognized his value. He had received with the same internal response. Not gratitude followed by expansion. Gratitude followed immediately, almost simultaneously, by calculation. How long will this last? What is about to cost more than this covers? What am I going to have to protect this against? Every bonus, every unexpected financial gift, every period of relative financial ease. He had passed through all of it in the same posture, the posture of someone bracing for what was coming to take it. He had never spent a single dollar extravagantly. He had never wasted anything. He had been so careful, so defended, so disciplined in protecting what came in, that he had spent 8 years in a state of spiritual siege, fortified walls, closed gates, nothing wasted, and nothing new arriving, because the gates were never open long enough to receive anything fully before the defense mechanisms engaged. He was not a container that filled and overflowed. He was a fortress that accumulated and hoarded and still felt empty. When I sat with Nathaniel for the first time, He told me all of this without any of the words I just used. He told me the facts, the numbers, the timeline, the strategies tried. And when he finished, I asked him one question. Nathaniel, when money arrives, in any form, any amount, what is the first thing you feel? He thought about it for a longer time than most people take to answer that question. And then he said, relief. And then immediately, dread. Relief that it came. Dread that it will leave. He had never said those two words together before. But the moment he said them, something in his face changed. Because he recognized in the speaking of it that he had been living inside those two words, relief and dread, for the better part of a decade. And that the dread was not a reasonable response to his circumstances. The dread was a spiritual posture that had become so habitual he could no longer feel its edges. It had become the water he swam in. And that posture, that specific, named, habitual posture of anticipating loss in the very moment of receiving, was issuing an instruction to the covenant of Parnassah every single day. Not in words. In the language the covenant actually reads, the language of how you carry yourself in relationship to what you have been given. The covenant was receiving that instruction and obeying it faithfully. Relief followed by dread. Provision followed by depletion. Close followed by not quite. I told Nathaniel, you are not being punished. You are being heard. The covenant is giving you exactly what you are declaring. And you have been declaring the wrong thing for 8 years, not with your mouth but with your posture, with the dread. He sat with that for a long time, and then he asked, so how do I change the posture? That question is why you are here today. The answer is not a mindset shift. The answer is not affirmations. The answer is not a budgeting system or a saving strategy or a new approach to investing. The answer is a law, an ancient, tested, transmitted law with a practice attached to it that has been producing observable results in observable people across observable generations, the Cheshbon Hanefesh. And now that you know, Nathaniel, now that you know what the pattern looks like from the inside, now that you can feel the shape of the misalignment in his story and, perhaps in your own, now I can give you the law, all of it, in the depth it deserves. The Hebrew phrase Cheshbon Hanefesh translates literally as the accounting of the soul. It is not a metaphor. In our tradition, the word Cheshbon, accounting, carries the full legal and mathematical weight of that word. An accounting is not a feeling. It is not a general impression. It is a precise, itemized, systematic examination of what is actually present versus what should be present. An accounting reveals discrepancies. It identifies where things went and where they did not arrive. It produces a clear picture, often an uncomfortable one, of the actual state of affairs. When the ancient teachers applied this concept to the soul, they were not being poetic. They were saying, the same rigor you apply to your finances, or should apply to your finances, must be applied to your inner life, to your spiritual posture, to the internal agreements you are carrying about who you are, what you deserve, what you can expect, and how you relate to the provision that moves through your life. The Cheshbon Hanefesh was first systematized in writing by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Leffin in the early 19th century, in a work of the same name that became foundational to the Musar movement, the Jewish tradition of ethical and spiritual self-development. But the practice itself is far older. Its roots are in the Talmud, in the teachings of the Tanaim, in the wisdom traditions that predate any written compilation. The Talmud, in Tractate Berakot, records this principle. A person should examine their deeds each day, not each year, each day, because the accounting of a single day, done with honesty, reveals more than the accounting of a year done with generality. The sages were not giving spiritual advice in the vague sense of reflect on your life. They were giving a legal instruction, examine specifically, examine frequently, examine with enough honesty to identify the discrepancy between what you declared and what you actually did. Now let me connect this to Parnassah, to the covenant of financial provision, in a way that is specific and practical. The Talmud, in Tractate Bava Metzia, contains a teaching that most commentators pass over quickly because it sounds simple. Rabbi Yoshanan states, the table of a man is his altar. What he places upon it is his offering. What he receives at it is his blessing. And the state of his table is the state of his covenant. Commentators have written thousands of words about what this means for hospitality, for the laws of Shabbat, for the mitzvah of welcoming guests. All of that is real and important. But there is a layer of this teaching that receives almost no attention. The state of his table is the state of his covenant. The table in this teaching is not a piece of furniture. It is a representation of the inner household, the spiritual environment that either prepares for reception or closes against it. And the state of the table, whether it is prepared and open or defended and contracted, is not a private matter. It is a covenant statement. It communicates to the law of provision what the household is ready to receive. Nathanael's table was always set, but it was set defensively, prepared for siege, not for blessing. And the covenant, which reads the state of the table, responded accordingly. Now I need to go deeper into Parnassah itself, because this word is often translated simply as livelihood or sustenance, and that translation loses something essential. The root of the word in Hebrew, parnes, means to sustain, but also to cause to stand. Parnassah is not just income. It is the spiritual sustaining force that causes a person and a household to stand, to be upright, to be established. And the ancient teachers were very specific about what enables Parnassah to flow and what obstructs it. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, teaches that Parnassah follows the vessels of the soul, not the actions of the body, but the vessels of the soul. A vessel that is open, spacious, receptive, trusting, receives what flows toward it. A vessel that is contracted, defended, anxious, braced, does not have the capacity to hold what is sent even when it arrives. This is not mysticism. This is the same principle that governs any system of flow. A pipe that is partially closed reduces flow regardless of the pressure on the other side. You can increase the source pressure indefinitely. More prayer, more giving, more faith declarations, and if the receiving end is contracted, the flow remains reduced. The obstruction is not at the source, it is at the receiver. The Cheshbon Hanefesh is the practice of examining the receiver, the soul, the inner vessel, and identifying with precision where the contractions have formed. Now, I said I would also address tzedakah in depth, because tzedakah is one of the most widely practiced and least understood concepts in Jewish life, and its relationship to Parnassah is direct and specific. The word tzedakah is almost always translated as charity in English. This translation is not wrong, but it is shallow. The root of tzedakah is tzedek, justice, righteousness. Tzedakah is not charity in the Western sense of voluntary generosity. It is a covenant act of justice. It is the acknowledgement, made concrete and physical, that the provision flowing through your hands is not ultimately yours, that you are a channel, not an owner, and that justice requires the flow to continue through you to others. The Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, the Maimonides, systematized the levels of tzedakah in 8 degrees, from the lowest to the highest. The lowest is giving reluctantly under pressure. The highest is enabling another person to become self-sufficient, to no longer need giving. Between those poles are 6 other levels, each distinguished by the degree of dignity preserved for the recipient and the degree of anonymity maintained by the giver. But here is what the Rambam makes absolutely clear, and what most teachers of tzedakah do not emphasize sufficiently. The primary purpose of tzedakah is not to help the recipient. The primary purpose of tzedakah is to align the giver with the covenant of Parnassah. The act of giving from your provision, intentionally, with the declaration that you trust the flow to continue, is the physical act that most directly addresses the contracted, defended posture that blocks the portal. You cannot simultaneously hoard in fear and give in faith. Those postures are mutually exclusive, and every act of intentional tzedakah is a vote, cast in the language of action, for the posture of trust over the posture of fear. This is why the Talmud in Tractate Tanit records the teaching. Tzedakah is greater than all the sacrifices, because sacrifice can be performed out of habit, out of fear, out of obligation. Tzedakah done with the full intention of the covenant requires something sacrifice does not, the genuine, practiced, repeated decision to release what you are holding in fear and trust that the flow continues. Now I want to address the objection that I know is forming in some of your minds, because I hear it every time I teach this at this level of depth. People say, Rabbi, this sounds like positive thinking with a Jewish wrapper. You're telling me to think differently about money, feel differently about provision, adopt a more optimistic posture. How is this different from what every self-help teacher says? Here is the answer, and I want you to hear it precisely, because the distinction is not subtle, it is total. Positive thinking is a psychological technique. It operates at the level of cognition and emotion. It asks you to manage your thoughts in the direction of optimism, to choose beliefs that feel better, to replace negative self-talk with affirming self-talk. And within its domain, the domain of psychological experience, it produces real results. I am not dismissing it. The Cheshbon Hanefesh is a covenant practice. It operates at the level of spiritual law. It does not ask you to feel better. It asks you to align with a law that operates whether you feel it or not, whether you believe in it or not, whether you understand it or not, the way gravity operates whether you believe in it or not. The specific differences are these. Positive thinking avoids honest confrontation with failure. The Cheshbon Hanefesh requires it, because you cannot realign what you have not examined, and you cannot examine what you are not willing to name. The accounting of the soul is not comfortable. It was not designed to be comfortable. It was designed to be true, and truth applied to misalignment produces correction. Positive thinking does not include tzedakah, the physical covenant act of giving from your provision as a declaration of trust. The Cheshbon Hanefesh requires it, because the law requires action, not just cognition. Feeling generous is not tzedakah. Giving is tzedakah. Positive thinking produces results proportional to the consistency of the psychological practice. The Cheshbon Hanefesh produces results proportional to the alignment with spiritual law, which means the results can and often do exceed any reasonable expectation based on circumstances. Because spiritual law is not limited by circumstances. It operates above circumstances. Nathaniel did not change his circumstances before his finances changed. His circumstances were exactly the same on the day the call came as they had been 6 weeks before. What changed was his alignment, and the alignment, restored through consistent, honest, practiced Cheshbon Hanefesh, restored the flow. Now let me give you the practice. Every step I am about to give you has a reason behind it. I am going to give you the step and the reason, because understanding the why is what converts an action from a ritual into a covenant act, and a covenant act carries weight that a ritual does not. The first step is named gratitude, not general gratitude, named gratitude. Before you do anything else in this practice, you sit and you speak aloud. Specifically 5 things that provision has done in your life in the last 7 days. Not the large things, the small things, the meal that was on your table, the transportation that carried you, the health that held through. Another week, the conversation that came at the right moment, the unexpected small kindness from a direction you did not expect. The reason for specificity is this: unnamed blessing is unconscious blessing, and unconscious blessing does not register as covenant fulfillment in the inner accounting of your soul. It registers as ordinary life, as background, as baseline, as the minimum you are entitled to. The moment you name a blessing specifically, you lift it out of the unconscious and place it before your own inner accounting as evidence. You are saying to yourself and to the covenant, I see what was sent. I receive it as provision. I acknowledge it as the Almighty's faithfulness, not as ordinary circumstance. This act of naming breaks the cycle of ingratitude, which in the tradition is not merely an attitude problem. The Zohar teaches that the spirit of complaint, tachanun shelo b'mekomo, is one of the primary spiritual obstructions to the portal of Parnasa, not because the Almighty is sensitive to criticism, but because complaint is a legal declaration that what was given was insufficient, that the covenant has failed, that the provision was wrong, and that declaration, repeated daily in your words, your thoughts, your posture, accumulates as a legal record against the opening of the portal. Named gratitude is the direct counter-declaration. 5 specific, spoken, honest acknowledgments of received provision. This is not an appetizer. This is the clearing, the opening of the vessel before anything can flow into it. I have seen people do the rest of this practice and skip the gratitude because it felt unnecessary or repetitive, and I have watched that choice hollow out everything that followed. Do not skip the gratitude. Do not rush it. Do not perform it. Do it honestly and do it specifically and do it first. The second step is the accounting. This is the Cheshbon Hanefesh proper. After the gratitude, you sit for 5 to 8 minutes, not meditating vaguely, but reviewing the past week with one specific question in mind. Was there a moment this week when I contracted in the face of provision? Contracted means you received something or provision came near, and instead of receiving it with an open posture, you closed. You braced, you moved into defensive calculation. You received the money and immediately began protecting it against anticipated loss. You heard good news and immediately began calculating how it could still go. Wrong. You saw a door open and immediately catalogued the reasons it might not lead where you hoped. You are not looking for this to condemn yourself. Nathaniel, when he did his first Cheshbon Hanefesh with me, identified 6 separate moments in the previous 7 days where he had contracted in exactly this way. 6 moments he had not even recognized as significant. They had felt like responsible caution, like practical wisdom. But when he examined them through the lens of the accounting, he saw them for what they were. 6 votes cast for the posture of dread. 6 instructions issued to the covenant. I do not trust the flow. I am bracing for the loss. Naming them did not feel good, but naming them was the beginning of the correction. Because the pattern, once named consistently, begins to lose its automatic authority over you. You begin to catch it in the moment, not just in the retrospective. And catching it in the moment is where the change becomes permanent. The third step is the spoken declaration. And I want to give you the exact language, because the precision of the language is part of the law. You speak these words aloud. I release the agreement I have held with anticipated loss. The covenant of Parnassah is not working against me. It is working toward me. What has been contracted is now open. What has been filtered is now free to flow. I receive the full measure of what the covenant promises. My house is prepared. My table is ready. Speak it slowly, with weight, not with the casualness of someone reciting from memory, with the intentionality of someone making a legal declaration before a court. Because that is what you are doing. You are appearing before the court of covenant law and issuing a corrected ruling over your household. The ancient teachers called this bitashon, trust in action, not passive belief that things will work out. Active declaration that you are positioned to receive what was always moving toward you. The fourth step is the act of tzedakah, performed within 24 hours of the spoken declaration. A portion of what came into your hands during the previous week. The amount is not measured by a percentage rule. It is measured by intentionality and by what the Rambam called kavanah, the direction of the heart. The act must be intentional. It must be chosen, not automatic. And it must come from a place where it represents something real, not from the overflow of easy abundance, but from the active decision to participate in the covenant economy of flow. As you give, you speak this. I give from my provision as a declaration that I trust the flow to continue. I am a channel, not a container. What I release from my hand, I release with faith that it returns, multiplied through the law that governs all giving. Now, let me address the most common objection to tzedakah that I hear. Rabbi, I cannot afford to give right now. My situation is too tight. And my answer is the same answer the ancient teachers gave. If you cannot give when you have little, you will not know how to give when you have much. And the posture that says, I cannot give from my lack, is the same posture that says, I cannot trust the flow, which is the posture that produced the lack in the first place. The tzedakah does not need to be large, it needs to be real. This practice, the named gratitude, the accounting, the spoken declaration, the tzedakah, is performed once a week, same day, same general time, not as a technique you try for 3 days and evaluate. As a covenant discipline you enter for a season with the same consistency you would bring to anything that genuinely matters to you. And now let me speak directly about what happens in the weeks after you begin. The first week produces resistance. I want you to expect this, not the resistance of effort, the resistance of exposure. Because the Cheshbon Hanefesh, done with genuine honesty, surfaces things you have been successfully avoiding. The calm, contracted moments you did not recognize. The agreements with anticipated loss you did not know you were holding. This is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. Do not interpret the discomfort as a sign that the practice is not working. It is the clearest sign that it is working. By the third week, Nathaniel reported something I hear consistently from people who do this practice with genuine commitment. The quality of his mornings changed. He described it as waking up without a weight he had not realized he was carrying. The dread, that specific low-grade morning dread that had been his constant companion for 8 years, had diminished. Not disappeared, diminished. He was catching the contraction in the moment instead of only recognizing it retrospectively. And in that gap, between the contraction beginning and the contraction closing, he was making a different choice. By week 6, the external began to move. The promotion, his wife's freelance opportunity, his son's scholarship. None of it announced, none of it accompanied by dramatic signs, all of it quiet, directional, purposeful. Provision finding an open receiver. I want to take a moment here and speak to the skeptic directly, to the person watching who has been burned before by teachers who made promises that sounded like what I am describing, who has tried practices, followed protocols, and arrived at disappointment. I hear you. And I want to say something clearly. I am not promising you that this practice will produce results in the form you expect, in the timeline you prefer, through the channel you are watching. What I am telling you is this: the law operates. It has operated consistently, across centuries, across cultures, across economic conditions, in the lives of people who had every reason to be skeptical, and no reason to expect anything different from what they had already experienced. It operated because they aligned, and alignment, as a law, does not play favorites. It does not reward the educated, or the experienced, or the spiritually advanced. It rewards the aligned, and alignment is available to anyone who is willing to do the accounting honestly and sustain the practice faithfully. The practice costs you nothing but time and honesty. The materials are in your kitchen. The words are in this video. The only thing standing between you and the beginning of this alignment is your decision to start. Tonight, before anything else, do this. Sit somewhere quiet, no phone, no screen, and ask yourself the Cheshbon HaNefesh question. Where in my relationship with money and provision am I operating in the posture of anticipated loss? Do not answer quickly. Sit with it. Let the honest answer come. And when it comes, write it down, name it, and write next to it the covenant truth that the ancient law says contradicts it. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18. It is the Almighty who gives you the power to produce wealth in order to confirm His covenant. That is not poetry. That is a legal statement. A named agreement with limitation placed next to a covenant fact is the beginning of a legal challenge against the limitation. Do that tonight. And if you are carrying a financial burden that has been on your household, if there is a specific need, a specific situation, a weight you have been lifting in silence, leave your first name in the comments below. Just your first name. I pray over those names personally. You are not a number here. You are seen. If this teaching has gone deeper than what you find most places, if you felt the law in these words, not just the words themselves, subscribe to this channel now, because what I am teaching next week builds directly on what you received today. In the next video, I am going to address the question that Nathaniel asked me in our third session after his finances had already begun to shift. Rabbi, the provision is arriving differently now, but I notice that some of it still disappears faster than I expect. Why? And that question leads to a second law, the law of retention. The law that governs not just how the portal opens, but how what flows through it is held. Because you can realign the receiver and still lose the provision if the vessels of retention are not established. That is the next layer, and it is one of the most important layers in the entire tradition of Parnassah. You deserve sustained transformation, not a good week, a changed life. The portal is beginning to open. Stay close. Shalom, my friend. Until next time.